Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're going to be looking at some well-used TRX-4 wheels and tyres. This particular one was the spare on our TRX-4. It's never seen contact with the ground other than when the truck's flipped over. It's never been full of water either. The foam insert is doing a fairly good job of keeping the tyre nice and firm. There's a little bit of give in the tyre before you come in contact with the insert, but it's pretty good. This one's seen quite a lot of action. It's been completely underwater more often than once. The result? Well, the foam is well under the tyre. It's either shrunk or more or less disintegrated in there. When running the truck on these, it looks almost like the tyre's completely flat. Now, low pressure can be a good thing, but these have gone well beyond. Now, we could just get new tyres, wheels and foams, but RC tyres aren't cheap, and I do rather like the stock TRX-4 ones. So we're going to be replacing the foams with these 3-stage jobbies from China, around £5 a pair and 117mm in diameter, which is just about perfect for the Traxxas tyres. For the wheels, we could reuse the Traxxas ones, but I think we'd be much better off with a set of Beadlocks. These ones, not surprisingly from China again, were £40 for the set. The outside of the wheels have a load of screws all the way around the edge, but these are just for looks. The locking is all done from the inside with 5 M3 screws, so swapping things around later shouldn't take too long. The main sticking point with this little project is the tyres are rather well attached to the wheels. We need to try and remove them without damaging the rubber. If you search around for ungluing tyres, the common method is to drop the wheels into a pot of boiling water and boil them for about 30 minutes or so. The idea being the heat's going to soften the glue. The downside comes when you try and remove the tyre. It's now full of boiling water waiting to go everywhere. I've also found that the temperature usually isn't really hot enough. It's going to be 100 degrees C, which sometimes just about gets the job done, but not always. The better method, if you can get use of the oven without being nagged about the smell, yes, there will be a smell, you can pop the wheels in on some foil at around 170 degrees C for 40 minutes. The thing to remember is, PVC and ABS have a melting point just above 100 degrees C, which is why sometimes the wheels warp in boiling water. Nylon, however, melts at 220 degrees C, some types even higher, well above the 170 we're using here. When they come out of the oven, they will of course be rather hot, and the well-used one with a damp phone will also be full of hot water and steam. Since we're going to have to pull the tyres about a bit, we need to use some nice sturdy gloves. You really don't want to go in barehanded. Once the glue joints give and steam starts coming out, it will burn your fingers very quickly. Okay, things to bear in mind. The hot rubber will be extra flexible and very stretchy, but in the case of the TRX-4 tyres, they're still surprisingly tough. You can really get in and pull quite firmly. I found if you work your way around tugging at it, it'll eventually give and start coming away from the rim. Sometimes there would be a spot that no matter how much pulling I did, it just wouldn't come unstuck without risking tearing the tyre. I found putting the blunt end of some tweezers in under the tyre and gently twisting would crack the glue without causing any damage. When all the sticking points were freed up, the wheel pops out without any real fuss, followed by the foam, remembering it's still full of very hot, rather dirty water, so we'll have to be a bit careful where it ends up. You can already see the state of it. It really wasn't doing a lot to keep the tyre stable. Okay, so that one was a bit of a struggle, but here's where it gets interesting. The other wheel was the spare, so hasn't really been outside much, and it's had the same 40 minutes of cooking. Yet with very little fiddling about, the wheel slides out with no sticking points at all. The glue seems to have turned to a gel, and there's also a very strong smell of cyanoacrylate. There must be something that happens when running the truck outside that toughens the glue. I would have thought that the used tyres would be the easy ones to remove, but there you go. Right, we'll do what we normally do when we've got several of the same assemblies to make, put one together on video and edit up the rest at the end. I've cleaned up the tyre inside and out. There was some interesting gunge on the inside. I'm fairly sure that's where most of the smell came from when they were cooking. I've also cleaned up the old foam inserts so they're not quite so manky. The one that came from the spare is almost the right shape. I think the flat spot is from where I pulled it out when it was hot. The used foams do look a little bit different. You can see where this one's almost collapsed. No wonder it wasn't holding the tyre up anymore. That's not the worst one though. I'm not really sure what happened here, but it's managed to almost completely shred itself. The stock foams really don't like being left wet. Here's the bits we need to use to make up the wheel-tyre combo. We've got the foams with the centres pushed out, so they're ready to go. The wheels with its bag of many small screws, and of course the Traxxas tyre that's all nicely cleaned up. The first job is to fit the foams. Always fun to try and cram into the small opening without getting any kinks. The trick is to almost roll it up as you stuff it in, then pop your fingers in there and stretch it out. If you stretch it a little, turn the tyre, stretch it a bit more, turn the tyre again, and so on, the foam insert should end up filling the tyre nicely. You can usually feel through the tyre wall if there's any lumpy bits left. If there is, just keep stretching. On the wheels, we have loads of holes around the edge for the small screws. These have nothing to do with holding the tyre on, so before we fit the tyre, we might as well fit the small screws while they're easy to get at. On the back of the wheel, there's the 5 screws that actually hold the tyre on. There's only 2 screws in there from factory, so we'll need to take them out and separate the bits. It's also worth noting that the silver ring in the middle is sided, so you have to take extra care that you keep it the right way round. In the screws bag there's 2 types of screws. There's some M3s and lots of M2s. The quality looks okay, the heads are nicely formed, so there shouldn't be any problem fitting them. So the screws around the outside face don't come loose while we're running the truck. You just know if one dropped out you're never going to be able to find it again. We need to use some thread lock. Just a tiny smear on the thread is all we need. If you overload it, it's going to squeeze up under the screw head, making a right mess. When they're all in, they do look rather nice. A bit of contrast, but not overly outrageous. The hex adapter in the middle needs its screws fitting too, and like the ones on the outside, they're going to be easier to fit now rather than wait for the tyres to go on. They need a little bit of thread lock, and don't forget to remove and thread lock the 2 that are in there from the factory too. And come to think of it, the same goes for the M2 ones. The Traxxas tyres, like most tyres, are directional, but unlike most, they have a handy little rotation arrow on the sidewall. As long as you double check, it does make it that bit easier to avoid making 4 left-hand wheels. It would be a bit less annoying with beadlocks, but you'd still have a bit of work to sort it all out. The silver ring needs to fit inside the tyre, so the tyre beads sit neatly in the machined recesses. It takes a little bit of jiggling around to get it to sit just right, but it's worth taking the time to get it just so. On the outside face of the tyre, drop in the outside of the wheel, being careful not to disturb the tyre bead. And on the inside, drop in the inside of the wheel. This time you need to be careful to align the screw holes and make sure it slides in nice and straight. So far, very straightforward, but now we've got one of the bits that's almost always a bit tricky with beadlocks. The screws drop in really easily, but there's a gap between the halves that's so big it doesn't actually reach the threaded hole in the other side. The standard trick is to use a longer screw and start pulling the halves together. Unfortunately, with these wheels, the screw heads fit snugly into some machined holes, and a typical cap-head M3 screw has a somewhat larger head, so it's simply not going to fit. The fallback method is to use one of the handy plastic 1.9 wheels that we've now got spare. Position it under the outside of the wheel, so when we press down on the inside, we're not going to squeeze the tyre. Get yourself set up so you can press really rather hard while being able to still get to the screw. Tighten it up a turn or so. It can be a bit of a struggle, but if you've got the holes nicely aligned when putting it together, it shouldn't be too difficult. Turn the wheel 180 degrees and press it down again while fitting a screw to the other side. And just like the first one, only a turn or so. Now we've got those 2 in, we should be able to fit the rest. Do them up a turn or so, just like the first. Then, using the cross-pattern tightening scheme, do them up a little bit at a time. The idea being to bring the 2 halves of the wheel together as straight as we can. These screws are all going to be under enough tension that they should stay put without any thread lock. It's still going to be worth keeping an eye on them for the first run though, just in case. And there we go then, 1 complete wheel. Looks okay to me. A little bit more showy than stock, but at least it's not chrome. Fitting them to the chassis isn't really anything special, but it's worth mentioning that the wheels fit over the stock Traxxas hexes perfectly. There's almost no detectable slop, and they're not a tight fit either. Sometimes these cheaper wheels are so tight they all but cold weld themselves to the metal hexes. It can make it a real pain to change things later. That just leaves a test run, of course. Not that there's a whole lot to test, the wheels aren't really going to add anything in the way of performance. They're slightly heavier than stock and they appear to have a slightly wider offset, but not enough to make a huge difference. Changing the foams won't have made much of a difference either from stock. Rather, replacing the old rotten ones will have returned it back to its original performance. I must say though, it is nice to drive it with tyres that don't look like they're about to peel themselves off the rims. For this week, that's about it. For next week, I think we're going to be doing some more work on the G-Made GOM. So I'll leave you with what remains of the TRX-4 bumbling around in the forest. I do hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, why not leave a like? It's always appreciated. Subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss the next video. And of course, comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!